shortness of breath, wheezing, a tightness in your chest, constant coughing, feeling tired. These are some of the symptoms of COPD. Today, learn about this disease and what's being done to fight it. This is Weekend Connection. My name is Mike Dyes. Now, let's get connected. Imagine if some of the most basic routine tasks of daily life were suddenly turned into exhausting, even embarrassing challenges. For those with COPD, activities that were once simple may become breathless experiences that can prove difficult and even frightening. Today we find out about the cause and treatment of COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Our guest is Dr. Barbara Yon, Chief Scientific Officer with the COPD Foundation. She has 25 years of experience as a primary care researcher with a focus on respiratory disease. She served for 14 years in rural family medicine practice, as well as training in the areas of research design and statistics. Welcome to Weekend Connection, Dr. Yon.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
It's actually an umbrella term for a number of diseases. Is that correct?
It is. It includes certainly the traditional chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which people think of as someone who has progressive, sometimes slowly, sometimes a little more rapidly progressive shortness of breath that is the typical COPD. And then there's the chronic bronchitis. These are the people that have similar symptoms, but you add on top of that cough and sputum or mucus production. And then there's the third group, and those are the people that have more emphysema.
Now, I'd say the name COPD is fairly new to me. Is the term new? Is it something we're just hearing about, or has it been around for a long time?
It's actually been around for a very long time. I think we're hearing more and more about it, though, because we have more awareness that it affects almost 6% of the adult population in the United States, and we have better treatment. If you ask what really did we do for COPD, say, 20, 25 years ago, well, we didn't have a whole lot we could do until someone needed oxygen. Of course, we always can ask them to stop smoking if they're smoking. It's the best treatment ever for COPD, of course. But now we have several other treatments that really do help with the symptoms.
Well, let's suppose my neighbor has COPD. Give us an idea, typically, what I would see on a day-to-day basis as I look over there and my neighbor's dealing with it. What is a typical example of what a patient goes through?
If he was one of those very fortunate people that he and his doctor recognize the symptoms early, then you may not really see a lot of any difference. He may, if he was a runner, run less far or go from running to walking, but he may be out there mowing his grass, playing with his grandchildren, all of the usual kinds of things, continuing to work full time. As the COPD progresses, and it almost always progresses, you will see that perhaps he's using a power mower instead of that push mower because he has less energy and less ability to do harder work. When he's playing with his grandchildren, he may be suddenly pitching instead of chasing the balls that they're hitting. He may be walking his dog less far. He may, if he has a strenuous physical job, be thinking about retiring. As people move on in their diagnosis and they lose more lung function, we may find that they are doing less and less. And unfortunately, some people are almost housebound with their COPD at the end stages because they just feel so short of breath. At some point in time, you may see that he then begins using oxygen, and hopefully with that oxygen, maybe is able to get out and around a little bit more. It doesn't feel quite as breathless. So again, it depends on the stage of the condition. And what we would love to have is people recognize their disease earlier, because we do have some things we can do to enhance their activity levels and their quality of life.
Our guest is Dr. Barbara Yon, Chief Scientific Officer of the COPD Foundation. The Foundation's mission is to prevent and cure COPD and improve the lives of all the people affected by it. Well, let's talk about those warning signs. What is it that we should be looking for as we think about COPD in our own lives? What symptoms should we look for?
A lot of people, as they get a little older, and this can start at 45 and 50, but frequently it's around 60 and above, people say, I'm just kind of slowing down. I don't have as much energy. Maybe I get a little short of breath, but, I'm just old. I'm out of shape. I'm a little overweight. We make all those excuses to ourselves when it's perhaps some of those things, but it is actually being more short of breath, more tired, having trouble sleeping, perhaps developing this chronic cough, which people who smoked call a smoker's cough, and it is not a smoker's cough. There is no normal smoker's cough. So decreased activity, fatigue, trouble sleeping, chronic cough, increased mucus production, doing less than you used to do. That's how people deal with the shortness of breath or dyspnea, is they just don't do as much. If you see those things happening, don't just assume that you're overweight or out of shape. Go in and tell your doctor or nurse or whoever about it and let them evaluate you.
Does it happen more in the certain countries, like in the developed world? Is it better or worse than, say, undeveloped or lesser developed countries?
Well, that depends a little bit, because the COPD is due to chronic exposure to inhaled toxic things. And one of the most common in the U.S., for example, is cigarette smoke. About 75% of people with COPD have smoked cigarettes. In developing worlds, some of them, yes, do smoke a lot, and maybe the men in particular will have very high exposure to smoke. But women in developing worlds, especially those where they're cooking indoors, may use biomass fuel like cow dung and other things, and they have poor ventilation. So it depends a little bit on what your exposures are in the developing world versus in the United States and more affluent countries. They may have people around them who smoked, that they're exposed to the secondhand smoke. We also are beginning to learn more and more about things that happen early in life. Children whose lungs never develop completely, so they start off at age 15 or 20 with lungs that never reach their full potential, and therefore are much more susceptible to recurrent infections and things like that. So those might be children that were born quite prematurely, children who had lots of respiratory infections at a young age. We also are learning more about the genetics of COPD, and we know that there is a genetic component. There is also one group, and we're not exactly sure what percentage of all people with COPD this encompasses, but those are the people with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. And this can be a very severe problem that shows up fairly early in life, or cannot show up until later in life, in the 30s and 40s. And then there are the others that are occupational. For example, people who are carpenters within a confined space. There's a lot of sawdust, and sawdust can be irritating. Bakers with their flour, people who work in foundries, people who work in mines, other than coal mines. Coal miners usually get what we call black lung disease, which is a little bit different than COPD, but the same kind of an idea. So people who are around a lot of inhaled toxins. And of course, there's the people who do use wood fire to heat their house in the winter, for example. If you don't have good ventilation, this can be a significant exposure.
We're talking about COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Our guest is Dr. Barbara Yan, Chief Scientific Officer with the COPD Foundation. Well, doctor, does it affect men more than women or a certain race more than another?
Well, it turns out now that there are more women in the United States with COPD than there are men, and more women are diagnosed every year now than men. And we like to say this is in part maybe the exposure from cooking, but that doesn't happen that often in the U.S. It's because, as Virginia Slim's ad used to say, we've come a long way, baby. And it's all been backwards, in my opinion, because we have more young women smoking and continuing to smoke. As far as the races, we believe that it is an equal opportunity disease across all of the racial and ethnic groups. About half the people in the United States that have COPD don't know they have COPD. They have not gone in and talked to their healthcare professional about their symptoms. They haven't been evaluated. And frequently it's because everybody, as I said, blames the symptoms on something else until it gets really very severe.
Yeah, I was reading that more than 14 million people have been diagnosed with it in the U.S., with an estimated 12 million more yet undiagnosed. That's a big number of those still.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a very big number, and it varies by state. For example, if you think of some of the states that are the lowest, for example, we have places like Hawaii that has some of the lowest prevalence of COPD, and maybe because they spend most of their time outside, so they have less of these exposures. One of the states with the highest burden is West Virginia. And you can imagine that that's for several reasons, and all around the tobacco growing and producing states. They have much higher rates of smoking. But in some of the places in West Virginia, they also have problems with, indoor air pollution, other kinds of pollution. And also, and I really didn't mention it before, and I should, we're learning more also about, nutrition and the role of nutrition, the role of being able, when you're young, to exercise, as I said, and grow your lungs to their maximum expansion. So there is some socioeconomic burden there, too, with people with more economic stresses, having higher rates of COPD.
Dr. Barbara Yan, Chief Scientific Officer of the COPD Foundation. How can folks find out more about the work of the foundation and about COPD in general?
Well, you can go online for the COPD Foundation, and as you might be able to guess, it would be just www.copdfoundation.org, and all kinds of online materials there, education materials, as I said, the chat, which we call 360 Social, that you can interact with other people. We have the opportunity there for people to sign up for the Patient-Powered Research Network if they would like to consider being part of studies on COPD in the future. And we actually even have an online app that they can download onto their phone that gives them a lot of things that may help support them when they go to their doctor's visits.
Well, our thanks, Dr. Barbara Yan, for sharing with us about COPD and the work being done to fight the disease.
Thank you.
My name is Mike Dyes. Have a great weekend, and join us again next time here on Weekend Connection.
Thank you for listening to this feature, a production of BBN, the Bible Broadcasting Network. BBN provides 24-hour Christian programming, great Christian music, and Bible teaching. Listen to BBN by clicking the link in the description.